casino town. I would have probably rather been here, but it turned out interesting. Might have some new money coming to BC Davis, so that's pretty fun. But so I'm back now for the rest of the quarter. If anybody wants to talk, but you're on, sir.
Okay.
And I think we might have you said we might have a guest speaker coming in this Friday?
Yes, we might have a guest speaker this Friday. We'll see. He'll let me know tonight. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So welcome back. If you didn't know, today the first assignment was due. So I think I've seen most, if not all of you, maybe one person who needs to see me later, but okay, so assignment 1 due today, assignment 2 due a week from today, and it will be posted as soon as class is over. I have it written up. Basically, the next assignment will be an RSS feed reader. So, go to your favorite blog and look at the RSS feed. We're going to, shove it into an application. You're going to have like a table view. You'll click on, say, /dot if that's one of the RSS feeds you have. And, you'll see all the articles that are available. You'll touch one of the articles, and then you'll see a description or more detail about the article. And then you can press like a read more and actually see the web browser-based version of it. So yeah, that'll be up shortly. There are a lot of elements to this assignment that, or there are a number of elements that aren't covered here in class, and I've tried in the hints to sort of point you to the things that are of interest. So one of the things you're going to have to do is parse some XML. You could write your own XML parser, I guess, if you want. You could use some open source one, or you could use Apple's. So there's plenty of stuff in place for you to use. So we'll see. Also today I'm going to try and keep it short. And part of lecture will be sort of on your own. I'm going to refer you to our good friends at Stanford. They have some lectures. Part of what I want to cover today or look at briefly is table views. And I believe one of the folks that actually implemented or works on table views is the person giving the particular lecture. So I think that would be good to see that person give the presentation instead. So I've mentioned this already. Start thinking about final projects if you haven't yet. I've spoken to a number of you sort of as we were grading, and it seems like people are thinking about stuff. So that's good. Basically, we have this assignment, one more next week, and then you're off for 4 weeks on your own to kind of, work your magic on whatever iPhone app you want to work on. And we'll get more details about that probably either Friday or Monday in terms of what some of the requirements will be. Okay, so last time we were going through this person, view controller, view editor, or person editor example where we had multiple view controllers, and we didn't quite finish up, so we will finish up that example today. We're going to take a look at navigation controllers, and then table views, sort of. Like I mentioned, I'll be referring you to Stanford's lectures for that. And yeah, so let's see. So last time we were trying to set up an application where we had 2 view controllers. So the first view controller was our person view controller, and we had this person model where we had a name and an age. And I've sort of changed some things for person view controller. I made the labels red so that we could see them a little more easily. So the idea was, with the person view controller, what ended up happening is we had a pointer to our person model that we allocated. If we look at the person view controller's parent class, it actually has a pointer to a view, so that's sort of the little red arrows I have here. So our person view controller has its view, has a model, points to a model, and it also has a pointer to this person editor view controller. So the idea was we were pushing or doing this modal dialogue, this modal view controller that would appear so that we could edit the person model. We would then do some work and then return back to the person view controller to see the edits that we'd made. And along the way, what we were doing is, in order to sort of to pass information along, basically, because we have a pointer to our person editor view controller, we just set the person model pointer in the person editor view controller to the model we already have, so that we just would share that data. So let's take a look at the code here. Assignment 2, which you'll see shortly tonight. And as usual, let me update this thing real quick. Okay, so last time when we left off, we were pretty much set with the 2 view controllers. We just had to do some stuff where we would edit some text, and those edits would be reflected back in the original screen. So let me see actually if I have So I think this was the one we left off on, and I've updated it, so we'll walk through those updates shortly, but let's just see where we left it off just to be on the same page. So we had this application that came up, and we had this person model, and our person was Bob Dole, and we said that he's 87 years old. And what we wanted to do is to be able to edit the person object. So now on this separate screen, we would be able to, change the name to, I don't know, John Doe. And this is basically where we left it. We couldn't really do anything now that we had that. So okay, so I've gone ahead and added a button to our view so that we can, when we're done here, we can go to our other screen. Let's see. Okay, so person editor view controller, we had our pointer to our person. We had our 2 text fields, one for name, one for age. And what I've done is I've added this IB action done. So this is where that button I just showed you, we connect here. And if we look, right, we see that connection that we made to the done. And in the implementation file for the editor, and this is something as we were working last time, I sort of was getting ahead of myself. In this case, since this is the controller that the person view controller presented, so self present modal view controller, we pass in the name of the controller we want to present. In order to get rid of it, so when we press done, we want to go back. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our parent view controller, which was the one that asked to display us, and we're going to say dismiss the modal view controller, which is, so this is basically dismissing ourselves. And basically that's the essential, that's the magic step of getting rid of us and returning back to our previous folks, or the previous controller. as we saw in this assignment, the assignment that was due today, in order to get rid of the keyboard, we need this text field should return, which is part of the UI text field delegate, which we know we've adopted here in the person editor view controller. And if we look back, at the view controller in the text field, we see again that the delegate is pointing to files owner, which we know is our person editor view controller. So both of these text fields, same thing, their delegate is the files owner. So at this point, there were a few questions that came up as I was talking to folks about homework assignments, and I don't know. If you have any doubts or concerns about delegates and how they work, you should say something at this point, or say something later, or be forced to read through the documents on your own. So we've got our text field delegate. So text field should return. So what this means is as soon as somebody presses the return button on that keyboard, we get this method or this message called, and we tell our text field to resign first responder. So that's like saying, hey, get rid of the focus, and that'll send the keyboard away. And as soon as that happens, the next message that we'll get is this one: text field did end editing. And in this case, what I'm doing is I'm basically looking at the text field that's passed in, and I'm just basically comparing pointers and saying, well, is it our name text field or is it our age text field? And depending on which one it is, we're going to update the person model. So remember, we have this model that's being shared, that's sort of being passed between two controllers, which, again, if we look at this image, or at this slide here, right, so now we're in the person editor view controller on the right, and we've just filled in the text boxes, and we've hit done. And once we do that, we just update our person model, which is being shared with our person view controller. So we're taking care of that here and here. And at this point, we haven't really seen this, but basically, since textfield.text returns an NS string, and we know that myperson.age, if we look in our person object, is an int, then basically we're just saying, hey, NS string, give us your value as an integer, and we shove that in there. So at this point, basically we're done editing. Our model has everything that it needs to have in it, and as soon as we hit the done button and we dismiss ourselves, we're going to be back in our person view controller. And what will happen here is, remember, we had a handful of methods, but view did load, which when we first created the person view controller, this is where we created our model. So we allocated our person, and it happened to be Bob Dole, and we said that he was 87. I think he might be older, but I'm not sure. And this is also where I put some more code here than was necessary, but we also set our labels to the values from the model. So we said our labels text is the person's name, or our name label is the person's name. Our age label is the person's age. And in this situation, now that we're coming back from that previous controller, what should happen is we should get this view will appear message called. So remember, view did load doesn't necessarily get called every single time. It gets called once for sure. And if the system, for whatever reason, decides to, well, for whatever reason, the reason being that it's out of resources and it deallocates some memory. But barring that, view did load will get called once, and then view will appear should get called every single time as we kind of bounce back and forth. And I think some folks in class were showing me that, you know, it seems like view did load was getting called all the time. But again, the general practice is view did load, you know, gets called once for sure. And then anything you want to update on a repeated basis will normally happen in this view will appear. So what we're doing here is, you know, we're coming back from the previous view controller, view will appear gets called, and what we want to do is we want to say, you know, take our label and set it to whatever is inside the person object. So we just updated the object on some screen, we came back to a new screen, or to the previous screen, and we want to update what we see on it. So in order to do that, we just take care of that with these two lines. So what should happen now, if we build and run this, so we've got Bob Dole, he's 87, we're going to edit and say that no, he's really 102, and his name is really John Dole. And when we hit done, we should see John Dole 102 on the previous screen, unless things aren't working. But they're working, so it's good. So I will post this updated version to the news group tonight if anyone wants to look through it. Does anyone have any questions or want to see sort of again how things were sort of connected up in Interface Builder to sort of get us where we are, or is it all crystal clear?
Following how the text is coming back from the edit screen.
Okay, so the comment for those that didn't hear in the back, it wasn't quite clear how the text is coming back. So if we're on this screen here and we make some changes, how is it that these changes are getting back to this screen? So what's happening, and let's start from the, hopefully this is probably visible enough. So we've got our person view controller on the left, and person view controller has its own view, and it has a reference to a model, and it also has a reference to this other view controller. So when the person view controller is first created on view did load, what we do is we allocate this person model, and we default it to whatever it is, Bob Dole. And when we click edit on this view, it's at that point that we pass a reference to the person model on to the person editor view controller. So let's take a look at that. So edit, the first thing we're doing is, and we'll look here at the implementation. So we have our pointer to this person editor view controller. And the first thing we do is we say self.person editor view controller dot my person. So this is our reference, is equal to my person from, this guy here. So at this point we've established that connection. We're sharing the my person object at this point. And then we're telling, our controller is saying, okay, present this modal view controller, which is the person editor view controller. So at that point, when we say edit, we've made this first link to the person model, and then we say present the person editor view controller. So now we've moved on to to this right side of the screen. And once we are there, if we look at the person editor view controller, so that right part of the screen, we see that we see our reference to the person, and then we see our two text fields. So on view did load, sort of this first time this thing is getting called, what we're doing is we're setting our text field to have the value of the my person name and the value of the my person age. So that's where these two text fields get populated. And So at that point, we are here. So we have this screen, and now we click on one of these and change it to Sorbonne. And here, as soon as we hit enter, right, we're going to get this delegate method called. So text field should return. So what that's saying is that someone pressed this return button. And when that happens, we're saying resign the first responder, so make the keyboard go away. And once that happens, the next message that the delegate, or that the UI text field will call is this UI text field did end editing. And here, we're sent in a text field, so we can say, well, was the text field the name text field that we just edited, or was it the age one? In either case, what we're going to do is update the myPerson object. So this is where, again, because we're sharing the object with the model object with that previous controller, it also has a reference to it. So at some point, it can look at it and see what's inside it. Okay. So, as soon as we hit done and we dismiss this controller and we return to the person view controller, this view will appear, will get called, and it'll pull out the name and the age and assign it to those two labels. And those two labels are set. Okay, so that's the example from last time, finished up. Again, I will post it to the news group and eventually to the website once I get access again. Okay, so next, so we've seen these view controllers, or we've talked about view controllers. We talked about the model view controller pattern last time, and today what we're going to look at is some additional controllers. And one of the controllers that's used a lot on the iPhone is the navigation controller. There's another one that we'll look at some point called the tab bar controller. And basically, the navigation controller helps you manage hierarchical data. So we'll look at an example in a second, but basically, you can think of traversing down the hierarchy of some sort of information where it's sort of very high-level information, and as you click on some of these options, you get more and more detailed or more specific information. And as you move through this hierarchy, what you're doing is you have different views. So I think we've discussed this a few times now, where basically each screen for your iPhone application is going to have its own view controller, and that's just sort of, it just simplifies the work that you have to do in certain ways. So the navigation controller in particular basically implements this hierarchical data traversal through the use of a stack. So you have this navigation controller, and its job is basically to manage the pushing and popping of these other view controllers. So, and it's, when I say stack of view controllers, it is most likely implemented as a stack. So here's, sort of the most vanilla navigation controller, where basically it has nothing. In this case, it has a pointer to a view a view controller that's coming from, or a view that's coming from somewhere else. But so basically, we have this navigation bar at the top, which in this case doesn't really have anything, and as we saw in this image here, which I didn't mention, I borrowed this image from our friends at Stanford, so thank you very much for putting that together, guys. This navigation controller is this container around these other view controllers. So when we look here, we can imagine that this is a container for the thing in the gray area there. And if we look in, say, mainwindow.nib, which When we look at the code sample, we'll see when this one comes up. But up till now, we've always been using the view-based controller or the view-based template. In this particular case, I used the navigation-based template, and I don't know if it's how easy it is to see, but you'll see that there's a navigation controller, and then there's a little triangle disclosure thing has opened it up, and underneath it there's this navigation bar, and then there's a root view controller. So with navigation controllers, you have this, again, it's sort of this, it's this container that then has other controllers inside of it. And in this case, it has the root view controller. So if we were to move through some sort of hierarchy, well, when we do something with the root view controller, at some point, it should have something that says, hey, load up this other controller instead. Push this other one onto this onto the stack. And that's very similar to what we just saw in the previous demo with our person view, where we were doing that very directly, where we had a pointer to some view controller, and we said present it as a modal view controller. So it works very much the same here, except the navigation controller takes care of a bunch of stuff for us in terms of what's displayed on the navigation bar and going up and down the hierarchy. So let's look at one of Apple's applications, the Contacts application, to see. So this is very similar to probably what will be going on in your next assignment, right? You're going to have some sort of you'll have some sort of list, and you can press on one of the things, and you go down the hierarchy. So very, very high level, more detailed, and we can click on one of these and get even more information, and more information. And basically, the navigation controller, you see how we're moving backwards and sort of through this hierarchy. The navigation controller takes care of this sort of stuff for us. So moving back, moving forward, and yeah. So does everyone understand at least general what the navigation controller is about in terms of moving through through hierarchies of information? Probably a good number of the applications on the iPhone use navigation controllers, and also these table views. You'll be making use of these in your next assignment. Okay. So next up, we'll look at some sample code to see how we do this navigation controller stuff and how we connect things up. And so I'll show you. So I'll show you a new project first, and then we'll look at the one that I've put together. So, up till now we've been grabbing this view-based application. In this case, we're going to grab this navigation-based application and see what it sort of defaults for us. Make sure that for now, this use core data for storage is not checked. It might, by default, it might be checked for you. So, nav.me. And let's just build and run and see what the default is, and then we'll look inside and see what we have there to work with. So in this case, it comes up, and we can't really navigate around or do anything, but sort of the basic initial bits of it are there. So if we look at our app delegate, which we should be used to seeing by now, we see our usual this pointer to a window, And in this case, we have a reference to a UI navigation controller. So again, to see more info, Command, double-click on it, and you can get, you can look at the implementation and see sort of what's inside of it and some of the various methods. Init with root view controller, push view controller, this is one we'll be making use of. Pop view controller animated, may be making use of, we'll see. So we know our app delegate has that, and again, just like all the other applications, the first thing that happens, the window adds a subview, and in this case, it's asking the navigation controller for its view. And what will happen, and we'll see this inside Interface Builder in a second, is when we add another navigation controller, basically the views, well, let's see. Let me get rid of this guy. So in this case, if we look inside main window, again, we see our usual stuff, our files owner. In this case, it's referring to the UI application since this is the first thing that's launching, that's starting up at launch. If we look at our delegate, we'll see a bunch of outlets. So we're used to this now. So references to our navigation controller and the window that we saw here in the code. Our window and our navigation controller, and they're both outlets. And we see, we see our navigation controller, and we see that the view that gets loaded here. So this is sort of, they call it, the default one is called the root view controller because it's the first, it's the one at the root that that we interact with. And if we double click that guy, he should open, but he doesn't. Okay. That should open up this one. So if we look at the default thing that they set up for us, their view ends up being this table view that we haven't really talked about, but table view is, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a table. And so what will happen, like we saw when we ran the vanilla application, it just loaded a table that didn't have anything in it. So let's go through a test application that I wrote and see how it is that we would add some sort of some view to this. Well, let's have the application start up. There'll be a little table with some data in it, and then let's press on the data and have it display a different view controller. So I'm going to get rid of that one. Too many. Okay. So let's take a look at first at what we're about to try to put together. So the application is going to is going to just fill the table with a few rows: Bob, Jill, Tom, Serban. And when we press on their name, it's just going to show us a new view with their name. So this view is basically a label that we update some name with. So let's see what we need to do to make that happen. So let's start with our root view controller. So if we look at the root view controller, it inherits off of a UI table view controller. So if we command double click on it and look more closely, we see that the table view controller is just a UI view controller, which is what we've been using all along, and it happens to adopt two protocols. In this case, the UI table view delegate and the UI table view data source. And we'll be learning more about that later, or you will be later as you watch a lecture later, where basically the idea is the table, in order to display information in the table, you adopt these protocols. So the data source sort of tells you information about the data, and then the view sort of tells you information, well, lets you interact with that data in some way. So we'll see a bit of that as I work through this. Again, you'll see more of it a little bit later. So we have our root view controller. In this case, what I've done is I've added an array, an NS array called names, and I've added a reference to this name detail view controller, and I called it name controller. So far this is very similar to the previous example, right? We had two separate view controllers, and in order to connect one to the other, sort of the first higher level one, or in this case this root view controller, has a reference to this other one, and that's what we've done here. So I have a reference to this name detail view controller, which we haven't written, although I have written, but we'll look at it shortly. And I've set it up as an IB outlet. So let's leave this root view controller for, well, actually, let's take a look and see how we fill the table with some information first, and then we'll move on to this name detail view controller. So when working with table views, there are I think 2 or 3 methods that you need to implement in order to make sure that things work appropriately. So if we look at the table view controller again, and now say we look at the data source delegate. So most of the delegates we've worked with thus far have had basically everything inside of them has been optional. So it's like you don't have to implement anything to to adopt that protocol. You don't have to implement anything. When you adopt this table view data source, what this protocol is saying is that implementing this table view number of rows in section is required. And same with this other one, table view self a row at index path. So if we look at the root view controller, so this is at this point fairly, the defaults in terms of what they implemented, what the template set up for us. Basically, we should see so we see a number of these methods that relate to the table. So number of sections in table view, I don't think that was, I'm not sure if that one was required. Let's see. Okay, number of rows in section. So number of rows in section and self a row for table self a row at index path were required. So number of rows in section. So in this case, it's basically, so the table, if we look back at the contacts application, this table has a bunch of sections. There's an A section, a B section, an H section, and each section has a certain number of rows in it. So this table view number of rows in section just returns and says, well, how many rows are in a section? And in this case, we're not really making use of the section, and we're just saying, well, there's just one section, and we're just saying that there are 5 items in that section. And in order to actually place something inside these cells, this function self a row at index path, this is the one that you'll be messing with quite a bit, is the one that's important, where basically you get this index path, which just essentially just tells you what row what row it's trying to display. So is it trying to display row 1 or 0 or 1 of some particular section? So I think I'm getting too detailed into this table view thing, but in this case, we've got Bob, Jill, Tom, and Serban in some sort of an array, and this method ends up getting called self_row_at_index_path, and this index path variable is going to be some number 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and I'm asking my names array to give me that 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 item and place it in the text label of this cell. So that's very briefly just kind of how the table works. But okay, so back at the root view controller, again, similar to the last example, we have our names, we have a pointer to some controller. The first thing we do when the view loads up, so we implement this viewDidLoad method, and what we're doing is setting up the array. So NSArray, array with objects, so you can just list your objects. In this case, I'm listing a bunch of NS strings, so Bob, Jill, Tom, Serban, and we can add another one. And then what I'm doing is I'm setting the controller, I'm setting its title to be names. So what happens now, when the controller sets its title, when a navigation controller gets this controller, it looks at the controller's title and sets its title to be that. So we see that we've got names written up at the top. That's because I've set this title here to be names. So we should see that title changed. So you can control that aspect of that by just setting your view controller's title. So our view has loaded, and the rest of what's going on is very table specific. Now another important function in terms of the table is this didSelectRow@indexPath. So this is basically saying I've selected some particular row, now do something with it. So let's set a breakpoint in here and see what information we can see. So basically what will happen is when we click on a particular cell, this function will get called, and so this is where we start referencing, we have a reference to our name controller, so the place where we're going to go. So we're clicking on a button, we're going to push in a new controller. So we're going to set the title of that controller, in this case to be name, and okay, let's look at the name controller, the detail controller, because I'm getting ahead of myself with this. Okay, so we know we have this view. Let's look at how. Oop, something bad just happened. That. So we know we have that. We had one particular view. Now let's look at the other view. So I call this guy the name detail view controller, and basically all it has is a name and a label, which is name label. And I've set up an IB outlet for that label. And so again, similar to last time, we created this view controller zib, again using new file, and user interface, you can grab a nib and create it. It's basically what happened here, and we created this name detail view controller. And inside here, the only thing I did was I added this label. And we know we need to set the file's owner to the name of the corresponding class. And if we look at our outlets, we see that the name label outlet from our .h is connected to this label. So if we now, this is where the connection, or another step of the connection happens. So our root view controller has a pointer to this name detail view controller. So in order to set that up, we had to, using our library, grab a view controller and drag it in here, and set its type. So if you remember, if we look at the inspector, the class has, this is a name detail view controller. And, so we know that our file's owner, let's see, has an outlet that points to that name detail view controller. Again, very similar to the last example. So I think I should have made a drawing for this, but again, it's very similar to what we had here, where we had these two view controllers, and the person view controller had this pointer, had this reference to the person editor view controller. We have the same thing going on here, where our root view controller has a reference to the name detail view controller. So we're looking at a list of names. I click on one of the names. I now see this other view, and that's this particular guy. So in order to actually get there, because we're using this table view, we can use this did select row at index path. So the system tells us, right, oh, somebody just pressed on a row, so we'll get this message called. We set up some attributes on that name controller. In this case, it's title, which if we look up here is name. And then we actually set this name instance variable, and what we say is, okay, it's look in the names directory, grab the object at some index. Well, what index is that? Well, it's this index path thing row. So that's just telling us 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And this is where we actually do that transition. So we're saying self navigation controller. So because of the way we've connected things in Interface Builder, this root view controller knows that it has a navigation controller. So it's saying, okay, navigation controller, push this name controller on. And so that's what's happening right when we click this. We're at this line here. So similar to what we did in that last example where we were presenting a modal view controller. In this case, we're having this higher level construct, this navigation controller that's taking the controller we've created and pushing it on to the stack. Yes?
Does application instantiate the detail view controller as soon as you get into the root view controller, or only when you
So does the detail view controller get instantiated right when the root view controller is instantiated? So I would say, based on the fact that we have this IB outlet set up, I feel like there are aspects of it that are created. I don't know about the view itself, because so for example, when we look at the app delegate, remember when we went through that whole process of here's the application starting up and going through all these things, and there was this part where I said, well, look, when it says .view, if view is nil, then it's going to go somewhere and load it and do all these things. So I'm not. So this root view controller has a view associated with it, so I don't know if the view is actually created at that point, but the detail view controller itself, I think, is, because we're reaching in there to try to access it, so it has to be, so some aspects of it. So I'm not sure if the view part of it is, but definitely, because the way, and we haven't really discussed this, but the iPhone embraces this lazy loading, this lazy man's approach to doing things, where don't do anything if you don't need to do it, especially when it comes to resources. So it's going to be very miserly and try to not allocate things it doesn't have to. But so in this case, if we did self.namecontroller.view, we could write some functions and things to see whether some of these initialization things get called at this point, or whether they somehow were called earlier. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I would say at this point the view has not been allocated. And once you do the push view controller, when it's ready to display it, it will actually go off and create the view part of it. I guess I closed everything. Right, so this root view controller, yeah, so we'll leave it at that. I think that's, Any other questions? Are folks seeing sort of the similarity with the previous example? How we have the two different controllers. Now we just happen to have this sort of third thing that manages how these, sort of does some work in terms of transitioning back and forth between them. But we have references to all of these to these controllers. Okay, so as far as table views, so I went through it very, very quickly, just kind of saying, oh, you have this self or row at index path, and that's important, and you have this other thing. So after talking to a bunch of folks during the homework stuff, it seems like folks aren't aware that Stanford has had an iPhone class, and their lectures are on iTunes. So they've done that class a number of times. The folks teaching the class have been working at Apple for 6-7 years. They're the folks who've implemented the stuff that we're talking about. And in this particular case, table views, there's a gentleman, Jason Beaver, who worked on implementing various aspects of table views. So if you go to iTunes U, and I'll put a link up on the news group, but it's lecture number 8, and the person giving the lecture is Jason Beaver. It's about an hour-long lecture, but they're only about 30 minutes, probably, of stuff that's relevant to us in terms of table views. He talks about scroll views and some other things, and then they have their usual things we go through when we start class type stuff. Take some time and watch that, and yeah, kind of hear it from the folks that implement it in terms of how table views work and how they're set up. And yeah, and we'll go from there. So one very quickly, just to see assignment 2. Again, I'll post this up shortly after class. So we're going to write a simple RSS feed reader using navigation controllers. So class isn't over. So if something didn't make sense, it's okay to ask me. I know some of this is kind of weird and I don't know. But we're going to use navigation controllers and table views. And you're going to need to have at least 3 screens. There's going to be a main screen, where it's basically, it'll be something like /dot, and underneath /dot will be the titles of a bunch of articles, and TechCrunch, and then a bunch of articles, or whatever blog posts or RSS feeds you want to use. Then there's going to be this detailed screen. So when you touch on one of these articles, you'll see, you'll have the article title somewhere, and some content from that blog post, so maybe a screen full of some sort. And then there'll be another little button where if you press it, it'll then display the web view. So we worked with web views in this last homework assignment, so it'll pretty much be the same thing, right? Grab a feed, grab a URL, give it to this web view, and then you can actually see the full blog post there. And because this will be in a navigation controller, you'll be able to kind of very easily move up and down this hierarchy. I've included a few links here so I'm not some sort of RSS feed expert or anything like that. All I know is, here's some feeds, some ways to format the URLs where I know that these work. And in order to get some of the detail that I'm talking about, so an article's title and some sort of a description about the article itself, we're going to use, I recommend you use NSXML parser, and basically you're going to read up on that, look at all its fancy delegates and all the things that it does for you, and basically when you use it, you're going to be looking for these tags. There's an item tag, a title tag, a link tag, and a description tag. There'll be a bunch of other tags as well, but those are the ones that you can kind of look for. So yes, Trevor.
Does it actually go out and hand the URL and then return move and say, I want the content within this tag and give us that, or do we need to somehow give the web page to the parser the raw RSS file? How does that handle it?
So that's part of the fun as you get to look into this. So basically, I will say NSXML parser will do a lot for you. You're going to give it a URL. So there's different types of parsers when it comes to XML and other things, but there's streaming parsers, tree-based parsers. So a tree-based parser would basically download everything, create some sort of data structure where then you could sort of traverse it and look for the different tags of interest. So based on what we just said earlier about how the iPhone tries to do everything very lazily, grabbing an entire tree of XML is sort of, resource intensive. So NSXML parser is a streaming-based parser. So basically, it'll grab some data, it'll parse, and as it parses, using delegates, you'll get some information about, hey, I just found the beginning of a tag. And then you can look and say, is this a tag of interest to me? No, continue. If it is, then you can sort of collect the data that you want and continue on. The last little bit, for me, it was helpful when I messed with some of this stuff was to use Firefox to view the XML. For some reason, Safari, I haven't been able to actually get it to show me the XML, but if you put in these feeds and then do like a Command U to view source, you should see XML source. And when you look at that, that'll just help you to, hey, you know what? I probably have it right here. So, for example, this is from /dot. So this is, this is the URL I think I included. So this is what Firefox shows. You do a Command U to view source, and you'll see some of this stuff here. So the NSXML parser will grab this sort of stuff for you, right? So item is important because item is the entire block of stuff for a particular article. There's a title, the economics of federal cloud computing, analyze it, okay? A link, so that might be useful for displaying the full web view, and then the description actually has this, some information about the article. So it's basically the news bit. Okay. Yes.
The tags that we want to pull information from, just as long as we include the article title and description.
Yeah, you can. So you can get as fancy as you. So like the last assignment, so people did all sorts of crazy stuff like loading bars and bookmarks and whatever. That's cool. So you're free to get as fancy with this thing as you want. And again, these are just hints from me. If you have other ways of doing this stuff, more power to you. But again, from when I worked with some of this stuff, the tags that I mentioned were the ones that sort of had the useful bits of things. If you grab the RSS feeds in a different way, so I think what I have is RSS version 0.93 or 1, or I don't know what the versioning goes with but it is well, if you set up your URLs differently, you can get RSS 2.0 feeds, and I think you might get some additional information. So again, just play around. This is I tried to simplify it as much as I could. So all right, and again, as usual, I encourage folks to talk and help each other out. Just make sure that what you turn in is your code. All right. More questions? One more question. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
I had a question about model view controller architecture in general.
Okay.
It seems like everything, the views that different controllers that you've shown so far are really tightly coupled. Have you ever run across instances where the controller and the view aren't particularly tightly coupled, like you might reduce the controller across different views?
So, and I guess I didn't mention this. So, for those in the back that didn't hear, the question was about model view controller architecture, and it seems like the controllers that we've been building have been very tightly coupled to the views. Are there situations where you can write more reusable controllers? I guess is a good summary of the question. So what will happen is when you're writing these applications, your models and your views will tend to be the most reusable bits of stuff, and then your controllers, because they are very application specific, they manage the interaction between these models and the views, those tend to be less reusable, unless, so right now we just talked about navigation controllers. So clearly you can write controllers in certain ways that, they are reusable. So we've got navigation controllers, there's another one, there's a tab bar controller. So it is definitely doable. Again, it's just the nature of MVC. When you're writing an application, your controller will, controllers will tend to not be very reusable. But there are situations such as navigation controller that you could write your own separate thing. Okay, so I will have office hours from 12 to 4. So 12 to 4. Big block of time. Come see me on Friday. We'll see. As far as what's going on Friday, we may or may not have a discussion. You don't necessarily need your machine. I might do like a big recap. Here's what we've covered. General thing, just to kind of review where we're at and stuff. So, all right. One more question.
Would we be able to show you the completed React class, our program and everything that class on Friday?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You can show me code whenever. If you see me, you can show me code. Unless I'm running away. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.